Hey guys, welcome back or welcome to my channel. Today I am going to be showing you how I care for my Calamondin citrus tree. So I know this isn't really technically a houseplant, but the care for a citrus tree is a little bit different than any of my other houseplants. So I thought it would be fun to make a whole video about how I care for mine, and maybe some of you out there have citrus trees or have other experiences with them. So feel free to leave those in the comments and give us all your tips and tricks. I by no means am an expert with citrus, but I have had this one for almost a year now and it seems to be doing really well. So I thought I would just give you all of my care tips and my experience with growing citrus. So the first thing that I think is important to talk about with this citrus tree is that Calamondin are typically grown more for looks instead of the fruit. So like lemon and lime trees, obviously people use lemons and limes all the time, and you can eat the fruit, but mine produced a lot of fruit this summer, and as I had already read online, the fruit on the Calamondin is very sour, like very, very, very sour. And so eating the fruit isn't really its main purpose. A lot of people just have them for looks. Although I next year plan on making a pie with mine, and I will insert the recipe so you guys can try it also if you have a Calamondin. But I've heard that it's really good and that if you sweeten the juice, it is kind of a mix between like a tangerine and a lime. So I'm going to try that next year when mine gets more fruit. So these do flower and produce fruit, the Calamondin. You typically November through March. Mine was blooming all year last year, but it didn't really produce fruit until around November. And these can actually produce fruit all year round once they mature, but typically they do not start producing fruit until they're 3 or 4 years old. I'm not really sure how old mine was. I got it from a local nursery and it really hasn't grown a whole lot, but it did produce a lot of fruit this summer. So I think that mine is definitely mature enough to be flowering and producing fruit all year round. And also the flowers on this thing smell absolutely amazing. And I didn't really realize this until I brought it in from outside this summer, and my entire plant room smelled so good. And also another thing that Calamondin typically do is they will drop their flowers and some leaves when you bring them in for the winter, and that is totally normal. It did kind of shock me as my plant started to decline, but I think it has acclimated to my plant room again. But I just wanted to note that it is really normal and typical for them to kind of go into a shock when you bring them in for the winter, and they will come back in the summer. So this specific citrus plant can get up to 4 feet tall in a container. I also read online that you can plant them in the ground if you live in zones 8, 9, or 10, which I do not, so I will not be planting mine outside, but they can grow outside as like a full tree, but they typically don't get any bigger than 4 feet tall when grown in a container. So the first thing with the Calamondin is sunlight. And these plants like a lot of sun. I think a good rule of thumb, especially indoors, is just give them as much light as you possibly can. My plant room, I think this is a southwest window. I always forget, but it gets a lot of sun, and mine gets direct sunlight. When I did some research on this, it did say that they should have at least 4 hours of direct sunlight a day to be like ideal. Mine probably doesn't get quite that much, and it does really well, but it is important that you put your citrus tree outside during the summer if that is possible. I had mine out when it started being about 50 degrees, and it did really fine. That's another thing with these, they are very cold tolerant, so You can move them out a little bit earlier and move them back in a little bit later, but I brought mine in when it started dropping to 50 degrees, and I think that was a good move because it did start kind of declining outside when it started getting cold. So anyway, leave your Calamondin outside during the summer and they will do really well. I did give mine part shade outside because I live in Missouri and the sun can be like blistering hot, and it got like abnormally hot here this summer, so I was afraid that it would burn. So I definitely recommend putting it in like a part shade area. But yeah, definitely as much sun as you can give them indoors is great. As far as temperatures go, like I said, they do well in like 70 to 90 degrees, but they are cold tolerant, and so you can leave them outside when it starts getting colder, but I recommend bringing them in and trying to acclimate them to your normal house temperature before it starts getting too cold, and that way it will be less of a shock on your plant. Another thing that I kind of messed up with mine, which isn't a big deal, but rotating them in the summer, especially when they're outside, is really important to make sure they don't grow crooked, and mine did start growing crooked this summer. So just make sure that you're rotating it like weekly to make sure that it's growing up. As far as watering goes, this was what I was most concerned about with mine because when I first got it, I had no idea how to care for citrus at all. And I was really afraid that I was going to kill it, but they're really not as hard as people make them out to be if you are a houseplant person. But as far as watering goes, I let the top inch or 2 inches dry out, and then I thoroughly water. So I put it in the bathtub and totally soak the soil and let it drain out. Another thing that's really important to keep in mind when buying or growing a citrus tree is that they are spider mite magnets because of the flowering. Pests are attracted to that. So it is really important to keep them clean. And I do this about every 2 weeks. I do like a thorough neem treatment on mine, and knock on wood, I've never had spider mites on it, even growing it outside this summer, but it is really important that you do that because especially if you're growing houseplants, like I am, when I brought this in for the winter, I was really afraid that it was going to pass on pests to my other houseplants, but knock on wood, I didn't have to deal with that. But just make sure that you're keeping it clean and checking it regularly. As far as fertilizer goes, I don't really follow the rules of citrus on fertilizer. As most of you know, I use liquid dirt on all of my plants, and I also use liquid dirt on my citrus tree. A lot of people recommend using like a citrus fertilizer. I know you can get those at like most big box stores or Walmart, and I definitely recommend doing that. I just haven't took the time to go out and get that because I use liquid dirt on everything else. I will say that when I bought mine, there were slow release fertilizer granules in it, and those usually last for quite a while. So I do that and liquid dirt, but I definitely recommend using a citrus fertilizer. So moving on to the fruit it produces, I talked about that a little bit earlier, but typically harvesting season for these is November to June of the next year. They can be ready anytime. There's also different stages when you can pick the fruit. I've heard a lot of people pick the fruit and eat it when it was like a little bit yellow. I waited until mine was very orange, and I'm sure that has an effect on how sour it is, but you can really just pick it whenever you want. And like I said, they can take up to a year to ripen. So mine actually has some fruit already starting again. I'll see if I can get that to pick up on the camera. But so I should have maybe some more ripe fruit in like June. Like I said, it takes a long time for these to like mature and the fruit to like grow. So mine had little tiny fruit on it when I got it last February, and it, like I said, I didn't get it until about last month. So it does take a while. So that is how I care for my Calamondin. Another thing is humidity. The humidity in here is probably like 50 to 55, and it doesn't seem to have a problem with that. So I don't think humidity is super important, but with any plant, the higher humidity you give it, most likely the better it's going to do. So Let me know in the comments if you guys have anything else to add about Calamondin or citrus in general. Like I said, I've had a really good experience with mine, and it's been really fun watching it grow and produce fruit. So if you are someone who is scared to start collecting citrus or just get a citrus tree at all, don't be scared, because they're really not that hard if you already know how to care for houseplants. And it's really fun watching them produce and eat their fruit. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.